What is up, guys and girls? I am Virtual Pix and welcome back to Interstellar Rift, and today we are covering power groups and I'm going to do it properly this time. Now, I'm no expert at doing tutorial videos. In fact, I've never done one before. It's pretty much a tutorial video, so I apologise if it's atrocious. On that fact, if I sound like I'm fed up or tired at all, it's not because I don't want to do this video, it's because this is now the fourth time I've had to record it because my audio, my recording software is fighting against me with the strength of 1,000 men. Like, oh my god, it's been a nightmare trying to record this, but it's fine. I will persist until it actually fucking does it. I will do it, even if my computer doesn't want me to. So, now that I've got those out of the way, let's go over this, shall we? In Interstellar Rift number 37? No, it'd be 36, sorry. And yeah, basically Interstellar Rift video 36 from me. In the comments of that, someone said that I covered batteries and that, but I did not cover power groups, which is completely right. That's my fault. I should have covered power groups when doing this, which is why I'm now doing this, and I'm going to completely cover power groups to the best I can, and also just power in general in this game. So, let's get our example loaded, shall we? Which we're actually going to use the Aegis Mark II. Now, first thing I want to note about this is the Aegis Mark II is a perfectly capable ship. It's on the workshop. By no means is this ship a fighter. It is not meant to fight. Honestly, I would not take it outside the starter systems either. It can hold its own, but it's not intended to. It's probably the larger end of what you'd want for the starter systems, basically. So, bear that in mind. That is my example ship, and it's perfectly fine on power generation, and it uses groups and stuff, so it's perfect for this. Right, announcements and stuff aside, let's get around to this, shall we? We're going to start with basics. I know you've heard this 100 times, it's completely obvious, but we're going to start with basics and we're going to work our way up. So, basic rule of thumb, power generation and drain. You always want your power generation to be higher than your drain, because if it's not, you will drain your batteries faster than you can charge them. Basic rule of thumb. Capacity, obviously that's how much power your batteries can hold. And then there's this fourth one, which is the one is what I assume is confusing people who have seen my videos and that, and definitely the person who commented who's new to the game. Peak consumption, this fourth one here, it's not as obvious what peak consumption actually is as what you'd think. Essentially, the only time you really actually need to be too concerned about peak consumption is when you come to making a power group for weapons and only weapons. Essentially, what peak consumption is say I was rolling around in the Aegis in the system and I had me piloting it with 24 forward facing guns. I had two guys in the turrets, well, one in each turret, and one guy for each of the two missile bays. If all of those weapons were being used at the same time, and I mean literally if they were all being used at once, that is where your peak consumption comes in. Now, as you'll see, obviously with the 24 forward facing guns, the two turrets and the two missile bays, we have a peak consumption of 2,240, a drain of 240, and a power generation of 451 with a capacity of 10,451. So I'm just going to quickly click this just so you can see. these missile launchers and the 24 forward-facing guns are basically what's responsible for the peak consumption. So you can ignore the turrets in this instance, because if I was having all of the weapons going, turrets, missiles, all 24 forward-facing guns, then you'd be breaking into the drain as well. But generally, the peak consumption for this is if you're in the pilot seat and say you haven't grouped your weapons and your missiles and all of your forward-facing guns are all firing off of the same group. That's when your peak consumption would be starting to come into play. With the 24 forward-facing guns and the missile launchers, this thing has more capacity than the peak consumption, so it can sustain the peak consumption. However, this ship is incapable of sustaining that peak consumption to the extent that it would drain the capacity completely, because it cannot store enough ammo to do so. Because the 24 forward-facing guns only have 2,400 total ammo capacity, and obviously you've only got the 8 total missiles that can go into that. So even if you had guys loading that, like just shoveling missiles onto it like madmen, you would still not be able to actually overdo that capacity, because the 2,400 main battery ammo supply, which is 24 forward-facing guns, they'd run out of power. The only way you would actually... They wouldn't run out of power, they would run out of ammo. The only way you would actually be able to do that is if you had guys permanently shoveling missiles onto the missile launchers, and if you had another guy permanently shoveling ammo into the guns. But, I mean, you'd have to have 3 people doing that, and honestly, with this ship in particular, if you get into a situation of where you do that, power running out on your main weapons is the least of your worries, because this ship's going to blow up before then. Like, it's not a fighter. You're going to run out of shield and just have a bad day. Like, a very bad day. But yeah, that's the only time you really need to worry about peak consumption, is when you got a lot of forward-facing guns and missiles. Moving on from peak consumption, with power groups, the thing that's most common that gets, from what I've seen, pretty much every ship into any ship that has a power problem, the thing that's usually responsible are the engines, or at least the engine's power group. And the reason for that is because, as you can see, you've got a drain of 4,515, a power generation of 23,706, a capacity of just a little over 4.6 million, and a peak consumption of 1 million. Now, the peak consumption is taken up by the rift generator. I'll come to that in a sec, so we're just going to leave that number as is for the time being. We're just going to go off power generation, capacity, and drain. There is another thing to take into account with this warp tick. It has a 6,581 energy per tick for warp, going into warp and sustaining warp level 1 when it's empty, and if it was fully loaded it would be 14,439 per tick for warp level 1. And the reason I say warp level 1 is because what most people don't realise is that initial warp power, this 6,500, well, actually I'll tell you what, we'll round it down to 6,500 for sake of ease, and we'll assume that the ship's empty and not fully loaded. So, empty, not fully loaded, we jump to warp 1. That's going to take 6,500 because we're rounding down. We want to jump to 6,000. We want to jump to warp 2. Well, you got to remember that we're already sustaining that 6,500. Warp stacks. So when you jump to level 2, you are then taking up 13,000. And then warp 3 again adds another 6,500. Warp 4 another 6,500 for 26,000, which is more than the generation. This is why this ship has just a little over 4.6 million capacity, because although it can only generate enough power to stay ahead of warp level 3, warp level 4 and up will start draining power from the batteries faster than they can be charged. But with 4.6 million capacity, you'd be hard pressed to actually outdo the power supply, because it can sustain that warp level for quite some time. In fact, the Aegis Mark II can actually get all the way up to maximum warp and sustain that for what is essentially going to be 3 or 4 runs across the system in the AUs, because you're only ever AU warp for about 5 seconds. You're only ever in the second to highest warp for about 10 seconds. So that's something to take into account, that the higher level warps, to get to the points that you're going to be going to, you're only ever in them for a couple of seconds at max. So although yes, they will be draining out of the capacity quite rapidly, if your capacity is large enough, you can quite easily sustain that. Now, the reason why I say if your capacity is large enough and not that your generation is high enough is because when it comes to capacity, obviously you got these single 1 by 1 by 1 generators that generate 150 power, and then you got the 2 by 2 by 2 big generators which generate 1,500. It's actually a lot easier to have a huge power capacity, because at 1.5 million these only take up quarter of a block. So even if, I mean, it's not a good idea by any means, just because if you get ignites on it, it's going to be a bitch to get rid of them, so just don't. But if you was to shove 4 of those in a 1 by 1 area, you would have, let's see, say 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, you'd have 6 million power capacity. In the same space it takes that one hydrogen generator. Now the funny bit about this is that 6 million power capacity is going to produce a 1,000 drain while charging. Well, that 6 million power capacity is going to produce a 4,000 drain. I apologise. It's a 4,000 drain for those 4 batteries. 2 large hydrogen generators can cure that. 2 of the large hydrogen generators, you're done. You've got 6 million power capacity. You've accounted for their power drain, and once they're fully charged, they will then generate 1,200, so 1,200 power on top of the 3,000. Oh, actually no, that would fall short, so you'd actually need 3 of these. My bad, my math was wrong. But yeah, you'd essentially have the power once they're full, you'd have the power generation from these plus the extra 1,200 from these because they're full. So that when grouping, that's what you need to worry about the most, is your engines. One, you're going to have to worry about this warp tick, and I'll show you something in a minute which will kind of put into perspective something that you do need to take into consideration. Once you've got your warp, you, as well as worrying about your warp tick, you also do have to, think about your permanent drain, because your permanent drain is what you're doing when essentially you're sitting there doing nothing or just cruising about. So let us have what are we moving on to next? that's it. Right. As something that I found building all the ships that I've built, the Aegis Mark II is probably the large end of a ship for start system. You know, it's a big ship. It's not the biggest. It's not small, but it's not big. I'd say it's a Corvette size. You know, something like this is perfectly fine. It will do pretty much everything you need it to do for starter system stuff. Anything above this, you're gonna want to start thinking about a nuclear generator for your engines. And we're now going to move on to another ship which will cover something else that I want to say about the warp and what happens when you get to a certain size. So let's load the Euclid. Now anyone who's seen my previous couple of videos will know that the Euclid is goddamn enormous. It is honestly big, like it's really big. Anyone who's been on the server and has had the pleasure of actually seeing the Euclid in game up close and personal will attest to just how enormous this thing is. To put it in perspective, I've got two little perspective tricks for you. First one being a 4x4, or no, a 2x2 armor block. 2x2 armor block, there. That's one way of testing it, or one way of letting you have an idea. The other way, this ship is so big that the HSC industrial station looks small compared to it. Yeah, that's how big it is. But it also serves as a perfect representation for something else. A ship of this size will be more than content to run on 2 nuclear generators. Anything above this, you're going to want to start thinking of more than 2 nuclear generators. I'm going to quickly show you the size of the cargo bay. So this is the Euclid's cargo bay, double level, pretty much same thing per level. You know, you got your cargo pads there. There's some along that wall that's just in front, and you know, same thing along here, down in the bottom row. This plays into what I was going to tell you about with the warp. This thing it's a big ship, and it has 15,084 per tick warp. It's worth mentioning, it also has this cargo storage down here, just underneath the refinery bay. This thing, if you fully load its cargo capacity to the max, once it loads, it will load eventually. Please load, don't crash. There we go. Right. This thing at full cargo load, 43,120 per tick. That's why it needs 2 nuclear generators. Just quickly to serve as a warning, because take this with a grain of salt, because I'm not 100% certain how this functions. You'd have to ask the devs. But this thing, I don't know whether it's because it's so enormously long, or whether it's actually so big that it creates the largest possible shield bubble size. But when it's got its shields up, the very tip of the arse end and the very tip of the nose actually poke into the shields. Now, I'm not 100% certain about this, nor am I actually going to build something to test this, because it would be a absolute nightmare trying to do that. But if I would assume that if you build a ship bigger than this, and this ship is actually capping the shield's bubble size, if your ship goes outside of that shield bubble, I would assume that because the hitbox for the ship would also protrude outside the shield bubble, that if that part of the hitbox is impacted, even if your shields are up, there is a chance it may damage the ship and take away from the armor rather than the shields. I don't know how that works, so don't quote me on that. Just if you actually want to build something bigger than this, be my guest, but I would suggest that you ask the devs exactly how that works first. They do have a Discord channel, you can find it on the main menu for this. So it's worth going and asking them, because honestly I got no clue how that works or why this ship does that. But moving on, I've got a few little bits left to cover. Now, these are just generalised things that are worth noting when you're building power groups and stuff. We're going to build a maximum size room quickly, and we're going to shove a nuclear generator into it. If you have a ship large enough that it needs a nuclear generator to power it, when power grouping it, nuclear generators read as 0. The reason for this is because there are 3 tiers of fuel, 3 tiers of heat sinks, and 3 tiers of turbines, each producing a varying amount of power from a set minimum to a set maximum. I don't know what the set minimum is, I cannot remember, but I do know that the set maximum that they can produce is 30,000 per tick. Unless of course you want to run the risk of blowing it up, and then you can actually run more out of them, but like I said, that runs the risk of blowing the bloody things up, so I wouldn't. Like, I really wouldn't. Plus 30,000 per tick, you know, that's a pretty decent amount. So yeah, I mean, if you're only using one nuclear generator and you need more than 30,000 per tick, by all means you could probably take one heatsink out for a little bit and generate more power. But if you're gonna do that, especially if you're doing it while piloting because you're warping, have a second person do it, because that thing's gonna need attention. Because if you even go so much as a second too long over that, you are gonna decimate your ship. I've seen the damage that these things produce when they go bang in a room, and oh dear lord, it is not pretty. So yeah, just bear that in mind. Nuclear gens need to be treated with respect, for obvious reasons. Right, engines. Do you want to go on? There we go. It's I swear everything's just fighting me today. It just doesn't want to play ball. Just gonna shove all of this on there so that I can properly explain what's going on. Gonna quickly hover over this one. Right, capacitors, otherwise known as the power cell medium, capacity of 50,000. The power cell small, the little battery with the little blue bit in the middle, this one right here where the mouse is, has capacity of 10,000. This big bastard here with the blue bit all the way down the middle has a capacity of 1.5 million, a permanent drain of 1,000, and a generation of 300. You are not going to feel or notice the generation of 300 until it is fully charged because of the drain of 1,000. The drain of 1,000 only happens while it is charging. Has a 1.5 million capacity, so you know it's pretty big battery. When it comes to engines though, the reason I've added an engine here is because engines are a unique thing unto themselves. When you're cruising along at not doing warp or anything, engines will primarily use these power batteries, and they are the most efficient way to power engines when you're just cruising along not doing warp. When you jump to warp, however, you will start using these power cells, the small and medium variety. It doesn't matter which one, they will both behave in the same way. When you jump to warp, they will dump all their power into the engines, and that's how the warp charges so fast. If you do not have these power cells on and you only have these power batteries, unless you have a metric shit ton of the bastards, which by the way is actually extremely inefficient in fuel, so all of those people who do that, because I know a number of you, including one of my admins who does it, yes, you know who I'm talking about, I see you, watching you. He has a lot of these on his ship, and by a lot I mean it's a lot, like enough to make you go, oh damn, it's a lot of blue. But yes, these things will charge your warp nice and quickly if you have a metric fuck ton of them. They are, however, doing that is immensely inefficient in fuel. So, when you're power grouping, if you power group your engines into one power group, I would suggest using both, because at non-warp, the engines will be more efficiently run by these power batteries than these power cells. When you jump to warp, while you are charging, these power cells will be more efficient. While sustaining warp, however, it switches back to these power batteries becoming the more efficient ones. So that's why they're a unique thing unto themselves, because they actually benefit from having both types of batteries on their power group. So I would recommend it, because oddly enough, it may not seem like it, but the game actually does do that. It does actually account for what would be more efficient. So if you have if you've done it right and you've actually done all the calculations, and honestly I would not expect anyone to do so because I don't, you could actually make a ship which is hyper fuel efficient by having it so that it would have the exact amount of power cells necessary to cover any level of warp charge, and then have the exact amount of power batteries to cover the sustaining for that, and then having the generators to obviously cover the 1000 drain that they have while charging. Moving on. Teleporters. This includes the large teleporter and the cargo teleporter, as well as the ACTRs. These, don't run them on that. Do not run them on the power battery. Run them on the power cell, because these things require an instant drop and go. If you power them by this, it is entirely possible, but your charge rate will actually be a little bit slower, and you'll be adding an unnecessary 1000 drain onto your power group. Power that. Much more efficient. Shields. Again, they're a funny one. They actually behave like engines. A lot of people will say to the contrary, but I know otherwise. When actually charging, and when they initially power up, and when they're actually charging the shield bubble and that to full power, and when they take a hit, they are more efficiently powered by these. However, once they reach their full ship-wide charge, sustaining it, they are more efficiently run on the power batteries. So use the two. It's a good idea. If you want your ship to run efficiently, that is. Molecular assemblers. I don't know, frankly put. I haven't actually experimented with them enough to solidly say which battery is better to charge with, but if asked and I had to just go off a gut feeling, I would say those. I would say these small power cells would be the more efficient one for these things. last but not least, when it comes to devices, this one's actually going to take a little bit longer to set up because of the sheer goddamn number of things. This and also that and that. Everything you see here, the refinery, the extractor, the assembler, the gravity anchor, the cyber warfare suite, the engineer console, the transponder, the terminal, the printer, the data core, the player shop and the holo table are all most efficiently powered by that. They are most efficiently powered by the power battery. Now, the data core terminal and the cyber warfare suite actually do have a peak consumption rating. However, they're combined, if you have one of each, they're combined, well, by one of each I mean what I've got here. So if you've got a data core terminal and a cyber warfare suite, their combined peak consumption is 100. This thing's generation is 300. Straight out, you've got your peak consumption covered. So, definitely power with that. With the latest update, the gravity anchor now takes 5 power per tick instead of 50. It's also worth mentioning that with the recent update, shields were changed. They are now more efficient to power. The large shield generators now have a strength of 10,000, whereas the small ones have a strength of 1,000. They haven't updated those yet by the looks of it. Yeah, see, they haven't updated it yet. It still says 6,500, but with the latest update, the large shield generators have a 10,000 strength, whilst the small ones have 1,000. They're also a bit more power efficient than they used to be when they're not charging. So they actually take less power when not charging, which is why I say use the power batteries. That being said, I think we are all done. I think I've covered everything. So, on the off chance that I have actually forgotten something, mention it down below. If it's just something that doesn't require much of an explanation, I'll just do it there and then in a comment. If it requires a bit more of an explanation, I will comment as to that fact. I'll let you know that it will require a bit more, and I will either mention it in a video or I will do a separate video similar to this, dependent on how in depth that explanation actually needs to be. If you have any questions, again, shove it in the comments. I will answer it as best I can. If I do not directly know the answer, I will attempt to find out, and I'll let you know the outcome of that, whether it be I do actually find out or don't, which, you know, I'm pretty good at finding things on the internet, so I should be able to find out. But I think that brings this video to a close. Hopefully you have a better understanding of power in general for Interstellar Rift now. Don't get me wrong, there is a chance that some of this could be wrong, so if I'm wrong, don't be afraid to comment the fact that I'm wrong in the comments. The only thing I do say is if you think I'm wrong, don't just say I'm wrong, prove it. If you prove it, then I'll hold my hands up and I'll say I was wrong, but I'm not gonna just say someone, nor believe someone saying I'm wrong with no proof, which I think is fair enough. But anyway, that does it for this video, so thank you for watching. If you like this video, hit that like button, and stay awesome as always, and I will see you lot in the next video.